I think there's a multitude of ways that you could answer this, and it just depends on, what your long-term goals are, what your tolerance is and capacity is for extending the platform. There's a lot of answers, and it depends. Welcome to today's episode of Ask Sympraxis. It's June 28th, and today we're doing an Ask Sympraxis Anything. We have some of the team, not all of the team. Derek is out of office on vacation, but the rest of us are here. And so our agenda today are questions that we got submitted through the web form and other places, even here. So we'll try to go through those. So let's start it off with the first question, which is our area of expertise in an employee directory. So the person wants to make an area of expertise searchable property in the employee directory, but we want it to be maintained by the individual employees. So we aren't keeping up with yet one more thing. Is having employees fill out the 365 profile the best way to do that? So our first answer comes from our ever-skilled Mark Anderson. Do you have a first place to start here, Mark?
Oh, I have some skills. Look at that.
Yes.
So out of the box, one of the things that we have in our user profiles is actually something called skills and expertise. So if you go to your Delve profile and click that update profile button and sort of click through a little bit, you'll get to that skills and expertise section. So you can add skills like JavaScript, SharePoint, and beekeeping. And then you can also add into you can also ask me about section. No idea what Microsoft's intent was sort of with the difference between those two, but those two are both available. We can add whatever we want to it. Both are stored in the user profile, and I've got the specific user profile properties that get stored in there. And the values get drawn from the keywords term set, which is an open term set. So I tested that by obviously adding beekeeping, because beekeeping would not have been there in our tenant. And so you can really add whatever you want. And if you think about that, that's probably going to cause you to have a lot of very disparate values in there, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on how much you want to, how much rigor you want to put around this. I did do beekeeping when I was a teenager. That is real.
So it's a legit skill. Got it. All right.
I knew that. You've talked about that, yeah.
That's in the SharePoint user profile. And so Todd has some maybe more to say about that.
Yeah, so I think Mark's answer is the correct answer. The question was about how do we produce, a way to find out what people's skills are. And then we've got a thing that says, here's what my skills and expertise are. So yes, absolutely, Mark's answer is the correct answer. When this came up, it reminded me of this other thing that I had seen, and I kind of just want to throw it out there in case the question asker wants to do more stuff, or if anybody that's watching it wants to do more stuff. And this is a blog post that Louisa Fries wrote a few months ago, and that I had used with a client with some other things. And this was the ability to add extensions, more values to Azure Active Directory, so not the SharePoint UPA, but to Azure AD, and then store values like skills, expertise, favorite color of bee, whatever, in Azure AD, and then anything that can consume Azure AD can take advantage of those values. Whereas if we put stuff in the SharePoint UPA, only SharePoint and those kind of tools can understand it. So Louisa's blog post talks about how to create those values, and then what she did. Her example was before, because I think Microsoft has added this now, she wanted to add a pronoun field to people's people card. So using Power Apps, she wrote her own customized people card and then showed you in that blog post how to add an extension to Azure AD. And then she added that field, that pronoun field, to her custom people card. So, and I don't know if you can show the pictures, the animation. So that's kind of the before picture.
Yeah, I can't really do anything more with that.
Okay.
That's what it is.
So imagine a picture.
But it's
now-
really
there it goes.
cool
Yep,
looking.
there it goes.
There it is.
There it goes.
So this scratches the itch that the user can enter their own thing in there, so they can enter their own pronouns. So one of the things the question asker wanted was, can people fill their own skills out? So this does that, and then you'll notice as she's doing this demo, in the top up there, she picks other people, and you'll see that pronoun field pop up in there. And so this was kind of moving forward. And in the chat, Casper asks what Victor is up to. And he mentioned something about the UPA is potentially being phased out or replaced. I haven't heard anything official on that, but this approach right here, adding it in Azure AD, is kind of a looking forward that if something does get done with the UPA, potentially they'll work the Azure AD in, and if we add something to it, this would be a way to do it. So I just wanted to throw this out there again. Mark's solution is probably the correct one, but I just wanted to put this in people's minds so they would think about it. Is there?
Well, mine is a way to do it without extending the platform, right? It's already, there's already a place to put those values in. This is another way to think about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's not right or wrong
long-term.
so much.
Yeah, exactly. So in that same vein, though, then we can use PnP Modern Search. So Mark, do you want to?
Right. So once you've got the values in the SPS skills, which is the one that gets filled when you enter skills, then you can map that to a refinable string managed property. And then you can use PnP Modern Search to provide a user interface on those that allows filtering by those values. And for those of you who are eagle-eyed, you can see that filter is not actually there because I didn't have time to make it work. But the idea is that anything that's in most things that are in the user profile can be mapped to a managed property and therefore used in a search-based UI. So rather than trying to customize the people search that is part of Microsoft Search, you can sort of roll your own with the PnP Modern Search for an employee directory. And we've done this a bunch of times for clients and it works quite well.
Yeah, one thing to bring up here is the approach that I mentioned in answer number 2 does not figure into this. So the way that the Azure AD extensions are stored, the PnP Modern Search can't get to them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So the fourth answer, Emily, you have some experience here, so.
Sure. So in addition, if you are using fields like SPS skills or SPS responsibility, when I was at a former organization, we used what was called at the time Hyperfish, but now it lives under LiveTiles directory. But essentially, it is a third-party solution that sits on top of all of this and adds in a couple useful tools like customization of email reminders. You get to pick out which fields are required that you want to have follow-up on. You can see dashboards for reporting to see how people have their profiles completed, and there was also a web part that came with it. So when you're thinking about your employee directory, don't forget to think about the management of making sure people are filling out their fields as well. And as you explore your different options, you may consider a third-party solution for that.
Right. And then so if we go to my answer, which is obviously going to be, well, that's lovely. You can buy a solution and you can sort of build a solution. And I think Mark's answer sort of gets us to, well, you can't extend the platform. So what can you do sort of out of the box, although it doesn't maybe have a lot of longevity? If we take Todd's answer and we add a little bit extra to it, we could certainly build our own bespoke solution for that. So create a custom form that allows the users to manage those properties in their user profile by creating an API endpoint that will elevate the permissions to update that thing. You could obviously then expand that to get and manage those extended properties. You also obviously could then use one of the workflow tools or your own custom code or some external workflow solution to automate some sort of approval process for that. So I think there's a multitude of ways that you could answer this, and it just depends on what your long-term goals are, what your tolerance is and capacity is for extending the platform. There's a lot of answers and it depends. And on
Yeah.
that note,
This
oh,
this
sorry,
reminds
go
me.
ahead.
Yeah, go back to that. So one of the things that we would do if you really wanted to do the Rube Goldberg mousetrap and marbles and all that is for another client we had to take data that was in Azure AD and do some transformation on it and then write it to the SharePoint user profile. So if you had more than one place that wanted those skills and expertise, so you wanted the Azure AD to be the home of record, you could use that whole the workflow stuff and copy those into the UPA so that if you really wanted to make it complicated.
Yep. All right. So our next question is the best way to curate people search. So there's this questioner is stuck in a situation
I think that was
where
Casper.
Yeah, I think actually it was. Well, here you are, live and getting your answer. So it doesn't allow to curate people search, and the UPA is about to be deprecated. So PnP Modern Search or custom SharePoint framework seems like the only options. Nope, we agree. So I would hesitate to say the UPA is about to be deprecated. I think that's too strong of a statement. I have not heard that even whispered. So I think you can still use it, but I think if we're really talking about it, the writing is on the wall and it probably will be deprecated, but I have no visibility into the timeline on that. So I think it's probably pretty safe to use it for quite some time. I would have to think that if they do deprecate something, there's sort of deprecation as maybe a generic software term, and then there's deprecation like Microsoft thinks about it. And so usually what deprecated by Microsoft means is no updates ever, but it sort of sticks around for quite a long time. So, I think that's an option.
So, somewhere I remember 100 years ago when Microsoft replaced PowerShell with replaced STS-ADM with PowerShell. They said STS-ADM was going to be deprecated, and they defined that as there would be no additional updates to STS-ADM, and that at some point in the future it could go away. So that's always been like what I've stuck with Microsoft definition of deprecated was. In our planning call, I mentioned that. I'm like, well, this says that the UPA may be deprecated, which means it might not get any updates. And somebody's like, well, if that's the case, if that's how we're defining deprecated, the UPA got deprecated about 8 years ago.
and of course, there's the tremendous institutional memory at Microsoft where everyone's now under 25 and has no idea where any of this stuff came from. So who knows what deprecated means this week.
Yeah.
I love Rob Windsor's comment on the chat about SharePoint SOAP web services. Yes, they are.
They deprecated those in like 2011 or something. Still working.
Maybe. Yep.
Yeah, and STS-ADM subscription edition, I believe.
Actually, I think the only true deprecation that actually went through is InfoPath forms. You can't do InfoPath forms modern, right? So
but you can still use them. They're still supporting it until 2026. You can embed an InfoPath form in a modern page. Yes.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go.
It's not pretty and it doesn't work very well, but you can do it.
Okay. All right. So that's a stronger deprecation. Good to know. All right, question 3, the command bar customizations on a site page. Are you aware of any way to have JSON and command bar customizations work for a document library or list where they are a web part on a site page in a modern SPO? I've been doing this for quite a while and it works for me. So I don't think that's an issue. I think it works. So, and this is a test I just did yesterday, and you can see I have a command bar customization and I have a couple of field customizers, and they are all showing up, and this is a web part embedded in an SPO page. I have also, and I can confirm that is also working in a Teams tab. So yeah, I think this one works. So that was a quick answer. Todd, over to you for some what we hope is the answer to the question we think this is. So
so the question was, dear Ask Sympraxis, how do I determine which Microsoft 365 ingress point my client is using? So the reason that we had a little bit of confusion about this is Microsoft doesn't ever refer to ingress points. They refer to egress points, which for those of you that studied Latin know those are the exact opposite of each other. And what Microsoft defines, what an ingress point would be, they consider the front door. So there's Microsoft front doors, there's the Exchange front door, the Azure front door, that kind of stuff. So we kind of took this question that we weren't sure about and turned it into a question that we were sure about so that we could answer it. So what this is about is Microsoft 20 years ago, whenever, bought a bunch of dark fiber that had been laid but wasn't in use. And they basically created their own internet over top of the internet. And when we use Microsoft 365 or Azure, any Microsoft services like that, the idea is that we get off of our internet service provider's network as quickly as possible, get in the Microsoft 365 or Azure front door as quickly as we can, as soon as we can, and then Microsoft owns the experience from there on out. And depending on where your data is at and where you're at and all these kind of things, that can be important. So I'm guessing that that's what this customer's asked, or this question's asking about. So if you go to the admin center, and I've got the URL up there before I clipped it off, under health, there's a network connectivity tab. And if you go there in the upper right-hand corner, there is a network connectivity test. And so this is one thing that you can do. You can run that test, and part of it runs in the web page, and then part of it's an executable that you download and it runs on your machine. But it tests a whole bunch of things about your network connectivity. And I think there's another picture here. There we go. So this was the test there. Oh my goodness, I really went over on this one. Not just two animated images, 3. So this is what it looked like for me. So I'm in the middle there, and those different spots are, you know, where my Exchange mailbox is, where the Exchange front door is that I'm using, where I'm at, and all of those things. And then on the right-hand side, you can't see it very well, but it's telling me that my stuff is a-okay. So my experience is good. What's the next one? I think it's the details. So this is that details.
If it tells you that your experience is good, does that mean your experience is good? I mean, you can't argue with that, right?
Right. The web page, it's on the internet. You can't argue with that. So I've not had this be a problem much. Where this comes into play, and the people that have to worry about this are if you are a really big company and you have things where, like, you're in the Ames office, but you don't get to the internet directly from here. You have a site-to-site VPN that takes you to the Brookline office, and then you get your internet access from the Brookline office. It's looking for things like that where because Microsoft really, they want you to get in that front door as quickly as they can. So if I'm in Ames, they want me to get in the front door that's in Des Moines or Chicago or something like that. And if I run this and this decides that I'm not hitting the front door until somewhere on the East Coast, that's kind of what they're looking for here. And then there are a bunch of documents, and I think they're on that connectivity.office.com, that kind of talk about how this is laid out and things you can do to control. If you get a bad score here, like the example that I gave, it talks about how you can move that stuff around, locations that you can make sure your firewalls let out the internet as opposed to taking over a site-to-site VPN, those kind of things. It's interesting stuff. It's one of those things, when the cloud came along and admins were all, gnashing their teeth and all that, we'll never have jobs. What are we going to do? This is one of the cool things you get to do now. You don't have to swap out hard drives anymore or replace dead power supplies, but you get to do fun stuff like this. And so this is, I think this is what the client was, or the person was asking about.
I concur, and I think we answered it, or you answered it quite nicely.
Well, thank you.
All right. Question 5 is around different home experiences in Teams. So this is one that Emily and I sort of got somewhere else and decided it would be a good one to answer here. So Em, do you want to sort of start with this idea?
Sure. So one of the announcements that have come out recently that we've all been waiting for is this idea that we could have multiple Viva Connections experiences for our organization. So for answer 1, your option is you can buy a Viva license to use Viva Connections. So essentially what this announcement shared is that you can have 10 different home experiences that you then audience target for people to have a different entry and beginning point in Microsoft Teams. This is in the blog. They talk about it being ideal for non-overlapping content. So be thoughtful about that, of if your organizations need to, let's say you're starting in an associated hub and you need them to get back up to that parent hub, for example. The other part of the announcement is that they're going to be combining the management of Viva Connections and home site administration together in that admin center. So This has a couple of things lacking. First of all, if you do not already have a Viva Suite license, now you need to purchase one just to audience target different entry points. So is there another way to do this perchance?
There is, Emily Mancini. So back when the Viva Desktop or Viva Connections with the Viva Desktop came out, there was you had to do it manually, and so essentially what you were doing was creating a Teams personal app, and then you could load that manifest, which essentially just pointed to the URL of a page, and you could load that manifest up into the Teams app area, and then you could auto deploy it by installing the app and then pinning the app for a particular policy. So essentially, the Teams apps comes with at least one policy, the global org-wide default policy, and everybody is a member of that policy at the beginning, but you can add your own. And in each one that you add, you can say what apps are installed and how they're pinned if you want to. And so essentially what you could do, and I tested this out and it worked pretty well, is that you could create a manifest for the different URLs for sites in your SharePoint tenant, and then make them individual apps with their icons, and then create a policy for each one of them, and then target that to a set of users. So essentially you could then create your own. Now, the only downside of this, and this is something that happens in Viva as well, is that you don't end up with the search experience for the suite bar. And so that's the same, you would end up in the same situation for both, but they look essentially exactly the same. The only other difference, and this may be a benefit, is by default, the Viva Connections app lands on a Viva home landing experience, which some people love and some people don't. And if you are one of those people who don't, this is also another way to like bypass that. You can run PowerShell to turn that off in Viva Connections, which is great. So that can be turned off, but this by default wouldn't have that Viva home experience. So that's the other sort of piece of that. So you could have like one root home place that uses Viva Connections without the extra licensing, and then you could add additional ones for whatever other sites you wanted to surface and audience target. So I think that answers that. So our next thing is resources, but let's pause here because we do have some time. And I'm wondering if we have any other questions. Has anybody?
Yeah, there's been a couple in the chat there, yeah.
Yeah, well, Todd, feel free to read them out if you know them.
Sure. So Sandra Flanagan asks, Dear Ask Sympraxis, what are the ramifications of breaking inheritance in SharePoint Online? You guys are the dreamiest. Love, Sandra. It says it right there in chat. Those of you watching the video, you'll just have to take my word for it. So that's an interesting one, Sandra. So all of us on this call have been around since SharePoint was on stone tablets and all of that. And breaking inheritance and all of that was like legitimately in SharePoint 2003, if you broke inheritance on a document library, you could take SharePoint out. I did that once. It was a horrible thing. So that instilled a horrible fear in me. The idea is that when you bring up any view in the web page of the document library or folder or whatever, SharePoint in the background looks and says, does everything just inherit from the parent? Great, throw it out there. Meaning that, if anybody can see the parent, if Emily can see the parent, everything inherits from the parent, Emily can see everything, and there's no processing to do. If any of those things in that library don't inherit from the parent, just one, then SharePoint has to walk through every single one of them and decide which one of them Emily can see. In the old days, that would really slow things down. And I remember there was a blog post a while back where somebody actually quantified it, and it took like 10 times as long for a page to load. And it was a page with a lot of items and all that. So that just added to this fear of, don't break inheritance. So when we get to SharePoint Online, though, which is what Sandra's question is about, we kind of pulled that forward. But the thing with that is every time you go into SharePoint and you click that share button, you're breaking inheritance. Like that's exactly what that share button does every single time you click it. And so it became very tough for us to say, hey, you should never break inheritance when Microsoft's like the share button's here and the share button's here and the share button's here. You should share all of the things to all of the people. And so we kind of had to step back, at least I did, and say, maybe this isn't so bad anymore. And honestly, I think the performance problems are gone now. So from a performance standpoint, you don't really have to worry about breaking inheritance and using sharing. Now, from an IA, an information architecture structure, you might want to wonder why you're doing that a lot if you are. So like if you've got a document library and a folder and another folder, and then inside of there's a folder that you've broken inheritance on and given a group of people permission to just that folder, then you should start thinking about, why did I do that? And should that folder be someplace else? Should it be its own document library? Should it be its own site? Whatever, from an IA standpoint. But I think for the most part, I've just moved to acceptance that we're going to break inheritance.
Yep, I agree with you entirely, but the management of it and the confusion of it, I think, is the bigger deal at this point. Mark, you were going to say something.
There are good ways to do it and there are bad ways to do it. And I think, like if you're building a giant library and you're expecting that you're going to set permissions on every document in that library forever, that's probably a bad design. If you're occasionally breaking inheritance for good business reasons, then that's a different story. There's a follow-up question from Sean about using item level permissions in the list or library settings. That's actually sort of misleading. It doesn't change any of the permissions. It just changes what people can see. So even though it says item level permissions, it's really not. You're actually just saying people can only see their own stuff, and SharePoint is then filtering things that were created, to things to items that were created by that user, or whatever setting you choose there. So it's related but not the same.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting here too, William is posting about it, and Casper made a comment about it, about the, item unique permissions for up to 50,000 items, and the recommended general limit is 5,000. I wonder if even with the sharing, if you have an architecture, an information architecture, excuse me, let me say it that way. If you have an information architecture where your list is big and then you are sharing things out of that list, I feel like you could still get to a performance issue. And so I think it really keeps coming back to, is your information architecture give you the best starting point for permissions? Like if you're sharing a bunch of stuff with a bunch of people externally and sort of creating that broken inheritance thing, maybe you should be thinking of an information architecture where you have those users as guests and they see things in the container by default, instead of trying to share them out onesie twosie in that way. And so I think always, if you are doing this, you probably need to take a big hard look at yourself and say, why am I doing this? Is there a better way to architect my information so that I don't have to be breaking inheritance, changing sharing in that way? I think that's probably
my favorite sharing link is anyone who already has access.
I love that one too.
Because that one doesn't change any permissions.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like if I'm working with Emily on something and I just want to send her a link to the thing that we can't remember the location of, that's the one I choose, because there's no reason for me to poke a hole in the permissions.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, Mark Anderson, when we work with our bookkeeper, I always have to change my sharing link to that. We should set it as our default in our tenant. So
you can't set it as your default in the tenant.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
exactly.
I wanted to bring up a thing about the limit of 50,000. We actually have a client that broke that. They had more than 50,000 sharing links, and because of their bad information architecture, they lost the ability to share. Like it actually happened. We've never seen that before. So it was ugly. Thing. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, we have basically reached time. I don't think there was any other questions. Was there that I totally missed? I think we hit them all.
There was one other one up there that, just to give credit to it, it was about external collaboration when you can't look up users in the home tenant. Casper, that was you. Good point. Not necessarily a good idea. People love to set security limits and not think of the implications.
Yeah, that's a sad one. We have some resources here for you to, and since I've left it on the screen for a while, if you needed them, you could have clicked on them, but let's head to our last slide. Our next Ask Sympraxis will be July 12th. We're back to our regular cadence. We're going to talk about managing company news. So this should be an interesting one. We have 365 EduCon Seattle coming up in August, and our Derek Cash-Peterson will be there. The CEF conference in Stockholm, Sweden, Mark and Todd will be there. And then Collab Days New England. Woo, Sympraxis, we are having our Collab Days New England. We hope everybody can join. You have a few days left, 2 days left for those who would like to speak, to submit to speak. We'd love to have you. Please submit. We'll put a link in the chat for submitting, and we will, sponsorships are also open, so if anybody's interested in that. And also we'll be opening up registration for free attendance to that event shortly. And Cloud Dev Clarity is my online web YouTube channel with Andrew Connell, and we'll be back with some new episodes of that fairly shortly. And so with that, let's wrap up our Ask Sympraxis for today. It was lovely having all of you great people come back and join us live, and we'll be back again July 12th. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.